First to Canberra, where the government has lifted its freeze on processing refugee claims from Afghan asylum seekers. The freeze was imposed 5 months ago, but has since been blamed for contributing significantly to overcrowding in Australia's detention centres. There are now nearly 5,000 people in detention on the Australian mainland and Christmas Island. The Immigration Minister Chris Bowen told Parliament today that fewer Afghan asylum seekers would now be likely to be successful in their claims for refugee status, after advice from his department and the Australian Embassy in Kabul. At the same time, the opposition has questioned the Australian troop levels in Afghanistan, suggesting more soldiers and equipment were needed. To reflect on the first week of a new parliamentary ball game, I'm joined from Canberra by Chris Uhlmann. Chris, first of all, let's look at the significance of Chris Bowen's announcement that the freeze would end on the processing of asylum seekers. Now, this whole issue of asylum seekers has had politics permeating it for so long, poisoning the debate really in many ways. What's behind it?
Well, Chris Bowen had to do something about it, Kerry. Essentially, that put a cap on the processing system, and there are a number of things which are causing problems. Of course, the arrival of boats, but that cap on asylum processing for Afghans meant that the pressure was building up inside the system. Now, he's released it in one way by putting in 1,000 new beds. That's not nearly enough, really. There are 5,000 people, as you say, in the system now, and now they're going to try and start moving these people through a little bit more swiftly. But most of the people who've arrived in the past 6 months have been from Afghanistan, and we still don't have a way of sending them home, Kerry. Even if they are processed, there's no agreement with Afghanistan or the UNHCR to get them back. We only have an agreement with Sri Lanka. So I've been told by officials that there's, even if no more boats arrive, 5 years worth of work in the system now. And
Chris Bowen was apparently keen to emphasise that the message they've received via the embassy and from the department implies that fewer Afghan claims will be successful. It's hard to avoid the reality, I suppose, that there's a political message in there apart from a policy message.
I think the government is determined to send people home and to be seen to be sending people home. And on current trends, as you say, apparently about half, 50%, would be rejected by the system. But the problem is, at the moment, we have no way of sending them home, and there's a merit review process in place, and there's a High Court decision pending, and both of those things will help to slow down the process as well.
Well, it's hard to see then that how this, as a political issue, is going to be taken off the books.
No, and there's two issues now. Of course, the boat arrivals, which was what the government was concerned about most during the election campaign, are becoming perhaps secondary to the pressure that's now on the detention centre system. And we know what happens. History tells us what happens with the system once it reaches that kind of critical point where there are too many people inside it for too long. There have been, increases in the amount of self-harm that we've seen inside the system already, and we've seen it spilling out into protests on the roofs of detention centres and outside detention centres, and that's more likely to grow and more likely to be a larger problem for Chris Bowen as the years progress.
And an embarrassment against the Kevin Rudd's promise going into the 2007 election that a Labor government would process, as a matter of honour and principle, would process asylum seekers within 3 months, that as a benchmark they should spend no more than 3 months in detention. That's out the window.
Certainly, Kerry, that the processing of asylum seekers now has blown out completely, and with the cap on Afghans being processed at all was essentially indefinite detention. Now that's been moved, and we'll see some movement in the system, but until there's some way of sending them actually back to Afghanistan, it's hard to see how they go anywhere.
And just briefly, Chris, your reflections on the first week of this so-called new paradigm parliament.
Yeah, getting to the stage where if anyone mentions the word new paradigm, I reach for my gun, Kerry. There's a lot of old paradigm politics going on at the moment.
A lot of targets too, Chris.
A lot of targets. And I think the significance of this week, 2 votes. Of course, the government lost one yesterday, and depending on how you cut it, the first time since 1941 or 1962 since that happened, or the Peter Slipper vote. I think in the long term, the Peter Slipper vote was the one that hurt the most for the coalition. That is something that has made them incandescent with rage, particularly given they can't do much about it at the moment, but they're quite certain that at some stage, when it's necessary for the government, that chit will be called in and Peter Slipper will do them a favour in return.
Chris Uhlmann, thanks.
Thanks, Gary.